Wow, this project took a while. NieR Replicant version 1.22 dropped way back in April. I did a first impressions video on the game up until meeting Kaine, but personal stuff kept me from going in-depth with the game. Now that I got my setup back, I wanted to finish what I started with this game. If you're new to the series, NieR is a 2010 action RPG developed by Kavya and directed by massive Coomer Yoko Taro. There are two versions of NieR, Gestalt and Replicant. The difference between versions boils down to the dynamic between the protagonist NieR and his daughter/sister Yona. Replicant version 1.22 is an updated version of NieR Replicant, developed by Toy Logic. Replicant never actually made it to America because the devs thought that Dad NieR would sell better stateside compared to Bro NieR. Some housekeeping rules before going any further with this video. First, for simplicity's sake, whenever I say NieR Replicant or version 1.22, I'm referring to the 2021 version. Whenever I say NieR Gestalt, I'm referring to the 2010 version. Second, I won't go in depth with NieR's plot in this video. Instead, I'll provide a link to Clemps' retrospective on NieR in this video's description if you want to get up to speed on the game's plot before going any further with the video, or if it's been a while since you played NieR and need to freshen up on some parts. This video's purpose is to talk about the changes that Toy Logic brought to NieR's mechanics. Third, even though I'm not going in depth with NieR's plot in this video, I'm still going to have to spoil parts of the game to be able to talk about the changes. So, if you still haven't played NieR and are wondering if you can play 1.22 instead of trying to hunt down a used copy of the 2010 version, then the answer is a resounding yes. It's virtually the same game with a few notable changes that you won't notice if you've never played the original version. Also, shoutouts to Bamcross for correcting me in my first impressions video when I said that Replicant no longer had the iconic Kaine intro in the game's attract screen. It's still there in Replicant, but now it's buried behind a second attract screen. I still think that this was done so as not to scare off new players by having Laura Bailey yelling at them without context. Toy Logic did a fantastic job with Replicant. If I had to compare it with other remakes that I've already covered, it's on par with the Destroy All Humans remake by Black Forest Games. Both games attempt to remain faithful to the original project, but have the confidence to diverge when they feel necessary to improve on the experience without completely altering the gameplay. The cutscenes, dialogue, and quest structure in Replicant are practically one-to-one with Gestalt. A few necessary changes had to be done with the dialogue and text to fit with the change in family dynamic. The loading screens that feature diary entries from Yona replace every instance of Dad from Gestalt with whatever name you enter as a player in Replicant. One of the biggest differences between versions comes from the combat. Gestalt's combat is passable. NieR can attack, guard break, block, and dodge. You can modify your attacks by holding down the button at the end of combo chains. If you catch an enemy's attack with a perfectly timed block, you can parry the enemy and follow up with a counterattack. If you press the left stick towards an enemy and dodge, you can roll behind it with a sidestep. After some plot stuff, NieR can also use magic attacks that use up a slowly regenerating energy meter. Honestly, Gestalt's combat is mid. Hitting enemies never really feels satisfying. Combos don't flow, and heavier weapons require you to count your inputs to avoid overcommitting to a combo chain. NieR himself has no poise and can get thrown around by the weakest of enemy attacks. Magic was handy as the controls allowed for free mapping on the shoulder buttons and triggers, which also share space with block and dodge actions. Catching parries is hard depending on the enemy type, and the damage you would deal from parries didn't really encourage the risk of getting hit. The cool thing about NieR's combat is how boss fights end with flourishes, showing NieR performing finishing moves with his talking spellbook Grimoire Vice. There's a reason why Platinum and Yoko Taro worked together to make Automata. Toy Logic took Gestalt's combat and tuned everything up. NieR's light attack can be held down to extend to a 3-hit combo, and instead of a guard break, NieR now has a strong attack with guard breaking properties that has its own combos and extensions. What's interesting about the revamped combos is that they changed NieR's movesets entirely between versions. I had to relearn how to use each weapon type in both games, which kept me engaged with both versions because I had to learn how to approach each fight with the right weapon. NieR can now move around the arena while he's charging up his magic attacks, instead of planting himself firmly in the ground until the spell charges, like in Gestalt. Another major change that Toy Logic did in Replicant was to incorporate lock-on targeting in the controls by pressing in the right stick. This addition is such a godsend. It makes it easier to keep a bead on specific enemies and switching targets is just as easy as flicking the right stick. Using Dark Blast doesn't slow NieR down as much in Replicant as it did in Gestalt, and the game now displays a crosshair on the center of the screen to improve accuracy. One change that I like but may put off other NieR vets is that Dark Lance is no longer free-aimed, but works with a soft target system. Charging up the spell brings up the targeting reticle on the nearest enemy, and moves on to the next one when you've destroyed the first target. Despite the revamped mechanics, the game still plays like NieR, but now the combat doesn't feel like the slog it used to be. It doesn't simplify the combat, but rather shaves off the rough edges that the 2010 version always had. Another big change that Toy Logic made to Replicant's control scheme is how to steer boars. In Gestalt, the boar's base walking speed is very slow, and it would only speed up if you hold down the accelerate button. Once the boar is running, you could hold down either trigger to drift the boar either left or right. Boars in Replicant walk much faster than they did in Gestalt, but now they accelerate when you press the right trigger. You don't have to hold it down, but you do have to keep pressing forward on the left stick, or the boar will revert back to walking. Once the boar is running, you have to hold down the left trigger, and then move the left stick either left or right to drift. Personally, I had problems getting the boar to drift consistently. I think I'd prefer a combination of both control schemes, where you accelerate by holding down right trigger, and use the left and right bumpers to drift. I didn't do all of the side quests, but I did do enough to get an impression of how well Toy Logic stuck to Kaguya's original design. When I did my review for Outcast 1.1 and Second Contact, I showed how it was possible to use the experience gained from doing side quests in 1.1 and apply to Second Contact with virtually the same results. This also applies to the quests I've seen in Replicant. The lines that have been reworked or were thrown out were either extraneous or still maintain that spirit of the original version. I didn't expect Toy Logic to go the extra mile to voice every single line in the game, but it's a welcome addition and makes the game feel more up to standard in a way that modern Western audiences expect. I'm really happy that Toy Logic and Squeenix kept most of the VAs from the original English dub to reprise their roles. Unlike Dad NieR, Bro NieR needs two voices to account for his younger and older selves. I said in my preview that playing a different version of NieR changes the context for certain moments, and that held up as I played through most of the story. The best example is Kaine's reaction to seeing NieR after the time skip.
Good to see you, Kaine.
You look like shit. How long has it been?
5 years. Welcome back, Kaine.
Wow, you grew up. So, how long has it been?
5 years.
With Dad NieR, Kaine looks like she is trying to see how the past 5 years have chipped away at the man, symbolized by the mask he now wears. With Bro NieR, Kaine is looking at NieR for the first time as a man and not a boy. At least, that's my interpretation of these moments. Laura Bailey's back as Kaine, and although you can hear the age in a Replicant dub, I think it works considering the age gap between Kaine and NieR. Liam O'Brien never forgot how to ham it up as Weiss. He still got the exaggerated swagger of an ancient tome. Julianne Taylor's Emile sounds virtually the same in Replicant as it did in Gestalt. There was one line that I felt had a better delivery in Gestalt, but I don't expect VAs to knock it out of the park for every take. I've been dancing around whether to call Replicant a remake or remaster, as those terms vary from person to person, but to be honest, I'm perfectly fine with considering Replicant as a remake, and a good one at that. Replicant adds a surprising amount of content into the experience, but you wouldn't know that going into it blind because of how it's embedded deep into the game. Honestly, buying version 1.2.2 feels like I bought NieR and got DLC without having to pay for extra. Additional weapons that were originally DLC for Gestalt have been rolled into Replicant's weapon count, so you'll have to do the challenge rooms unlocked after ending A to get 100% completion on weapons to unlock endings C and D. After reaching ending A, subsequent playthroughs reveal the motivations behind shades that NieR and the gang fight, and recontextualize boss encounters. That's nothing new. It's what makes NieR NieR. What Replicant added are vignettes between characters in between key moments that make what was originally implied in Gestalt to now be overt. This narrative layering is what makes it worthwhile to replay NieR again and again, because more details get revealed with each successive run. However, this means that in order to get the most out of NieR, you have to keep playing it several times over. Granted, every playthrough following ending A only begins after the time skip, but the second half of the game can still add 4 hours to your overall playtime, which means starting the game from the time skip 3 times, or 2 if you're smart and save at the checkpoint leading up to the final boss fights. The other thing that can wear you down after trying to fully complete NieR is the grind. See, in order to get endings C and D, you have to collect every weapon in the game. Some weapons are available in stores, and some can be found in the open world, but there are also weapons tied to side quests, and this is where the game really tries your patience. One quest tasks you with fighting a particularly strong shade out in the northern plains. The problem with this quest is that whether the shade will spawn on the field is completely random, so you have to jump in and out of loading zones to reset the spawn trigger until it appears, and then you have to make sure to survive so you don't have to do that runaround again. Another quest requires you to collect a set of materials to repair something, but one of the items needed is machine oil. Machine oil is a rare item that only drops from a specific enemy type in the junk heap. To get enough of the material for this quest, you have to find a specific spot in the dungeon where there are plenty of enemies available to farm for machine oil, and you can redo this section several times and never see it drop from an enemy. If that weren't annoying enough, upgrading weapons also requires farming for materials, and some of the best weapons in the game require Damascus steel, which is also a rare drop in the junk heap. There's a spot in the dungeon that's perfect for farming, but the problem is that Damascus steel is in the same pool of rare item drops for the area as 2 other materials, and it seems to have the lowest chance of dropping. Upgrading weapons isn't mandatory to complete the game, but having a sword deal 999 damage with every hit was more than enough of an incentive for me to push on. That is, until I realized the biggest change that Replicant did to boss encounters that could potentially put off returning players. Bosses have damage thresholds that prevent you from wiping them out until every piece of dialogue in the boss fight plays out. This means that no matter how many times I swung my big dick sword that pasted every single enemy in the dungeon at the boss, the fight wouldn't be over until the boss fully spoke their piece. It's good for narrative purposes, since it makes sure you get as much information out of the fight as the game wants to give you, but it neutered whatever joy I had in seeing big numbers attached to my weapons. So there's a new ending in Replicant. Technically it's not new, but takes a story from Grimoire NieR and incorporates it into the game. But the things that do happen on that path are definitely new to the story. I want to talk about it, but I feel like it's better to hold off, even though it's been months since the game dropped. Instead, I'll post a series of images that best capture the experience of the new ending's path. Here's a thing you need to know about the new ending. All that stuff I said earlier about how NieR expects you to do successive runs of the game in order to get the most out of the experience, that also applies to the new ending. Once you've gotten ending D, you gotta start a new game and play up to a certain point to reach the path to ending E. That means playing the game for about 2 hours and seeing content that you've already seen in order to get to the new stuff. Now here's the question you need to ask yourself before getting NieR. Is it worth it to go through the same motions again and again to get everything out of the story? I'm a creature of novelty. I can't stay committed to any single thing for too long, and I'm always on the lookout for something new to experience. So when I tell you that having played NieR Gestalt and NieR Replicant for the past month back to back, watching the same cutscenes like 5 to 6 times over, grinding for the same materials twice to clear side quests for both versions, playing the Zork quest in the Forest of Myth and dying twice, only to see all of the work I put into both games get erased from my hard drives because that's the price you pay for seeing ending D. All of that bullshit was worth it to experience ending E. All of the problems that I have with both versions of NieR, Gestalt's mid-combat, Replicant's damage gating, the grind, the runaround for every single fetch quest. I can put up with all of that because the writing kept me hooked for the entire time. I don't expect everyone to love NieR's writing. It's not subtle.
My sister! No! You people are the true monsters!
And you can feel like a dog getting your chain yanked every time the game has you do the runaround for side quests. But I love this setting, and I love these characters, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that these people get a happy ending. Please play NieR.